It started like any other morning in New York City. The sun had barely pierced the skyline line. The streets were still humming with the first delivery trucks and early commuters. And I grabbed my phone, bleary-eyed, ready to check my bank balance before my first cup of coffee. But then something happened that made me freeze. Literally. My bank app didn't load. I tried logging in again, and the screen flashed a message I've never seen in my life. Your account has been frozen. Please contact customer service immediately. My heart skipped. My account? Frozen? In the United States? In 2025, in the heart of Manhattan? I stared at the phone, hoping it was a glitch, a bug, anything but the reality that was slowly sinking in. Because a frozen bank account in America doesn't just mean you can't swipe your debit card or pay your rent. It means you can't access the money you rely on to live. I quickly called the customer service number listed on my bank's website, but the lines were jammed. Every second felt like hours. And then it hit me. This could happen to anyone. Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, Houston. Your money isn't necessarily safe, even in the most stable banks. I knew I had to act fast. I ran down the street to my local branch. The lobby was eerily quiet. A few early risers sat nervously, whispering to each other about similar issues. The tellers looked stressed. We don't know when accounts will be unfrozen, one whispered to me. The system is on lockdown. Fear is a funny thing. It's invisible, but it spreads faster than fire. I could see it on the faces around me. The anxiety of regular Americans realizing that for all the safety nets, the banks we trust are fragile. And at that moment, I started thinking about the bigger picture. What happens if banks shut down or freeze accounts nationwide? This wasn't just my problem anymore. It could spiral into a crisis that would affect every major city in the United States. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, Miami, San Francisco. Suddenly, the safety of your savings, your paycheck, even your ability to buy groceries was in question. As I waited, my mind raced. How did we get here? Banks are supposed to protect your money. FDIC insurance promises that your deposits are safe. But what if the system itself falters? If one bank freezes accounts due to a cyber attack, a liquidity crisis, or regulatory issues, it could trigger a domino effect across the entire financial system. And that's when the reality hit. This is exactly what people fear during financial panic, yet few really understand what it would mean on the ground. If banks shut down tomorrow, millions of Americans would wake up just like me, staring at a frozen account and no answers. Imagine this. You live in Houston, Texas. Your mortgage is due tomorrow. Your paycheck is in your account, but it's frozen. You call your landlord. You call your utility company. Nobody knows when the funds will be accessible. The stock market plummets as fear grips Wall Street. Social media explodes with panicked messages. People begin to hoard cash, lines form outside ATMs, and the local grocery stores see empty shelves because electronic transactions have frozen. Or picture someone in Los Angeles, California, a small business owner. You rely on wire transfers, credit card payments, and payroll deposits. Suddenly, none of your transactions go through. Employees can't get paid. Suppliers stop delivering. You watch as a thriving business starts to crumble in real time. And it doesn't stop there. Because the United States economy is intertwined with global markets, an event like this doesn't stay local. From Chicago to New York, from Miami to Seattle, banks are interconnected. A freeze in one major bank could ripple across the entire nation. Credit cards, auto loans, even federal payments like Social Security or tax refunds could be delayed. Fear is contagious, and in this scenario, it spreads like wildfire. Families panic, markets panic, governments scramble. Banks, which are usually the backbone of financial stability, suddenly look fragile. And as an average American, you realize you are standing in the middle of a crisis you never saw coming. As I waited in that quiet, tense lobby in New York, I began asking the tellers questions. One young teller finally broke down. "It's the system," she said. "We can't access accounts. Not just yours. Hundreds of people are affected, and we don't know when it will be fixed." My mind went straight to my friends and family in other cities. Boston, Philadelphia, Atlanta. If this spread nationally, what would happen to their paychecks, their mortgages, their car loans? And then the thought hit me like a brick. Even though the Federal Reserve could step in, even though the government has emergency measures, those interventions take time that Americans might not have. I remembered reading about past financial crises, the 2008 banking collapse, the Great Depression, even localized credit freezes in the 1980s. But this wasn't history anymore. This was happening now. And unlike past crises, it wasn't just about failing banks. It was about inaccessible money, frozen accounts, and the inability of Americans to carry out basic transactions. I pulled out my phone again, hoping for some updates from my bank's app. Nothing. The website kept crashing. The news feeds were starting to show flashes of panic. Small hashtags trending like bank freeze and money locked were everywhere. I clicked through cautiously. People were sharing stories similar to mine: frozen accounts, failed transfers, inability to withdraw cash. It was happening all over the country. This is when the fear really hits, because Americans are used to convenience. Your debit card works, your paycheck hits your account automatically. PayPal, Venmo, Apple Pay, they all work instantly. But what happens when the foundation, the bank, fails? I thought about my rent, my utilities, my groceries, my gas tank, everything. Everything relied on a functional bank system. And now the very lifeline I trusted every single day was gone. If banks shut down today, the effects would be immediate. ATM machines would become useless overnight. Debit and credit transactions would halt. Online banking, dead in the water. Employers wouldn't be able to pay salaries, and anyone trying to withdraw cash would face impossible lines, limited funds, and rationed withdrawals. And it wouldn't just stop at money. Because money fuels daily life, a banking shutdown would cascade into every aspect of American life. Cities like Chicago and Los Angeles would see supply chain disruptions as companies can't pay vendors. Restaurants and grocery stores would start limiting purchases. Gas stations might refuse credit cards. Schools and hospitals could face delayed funding. The psychological impact would be staggering. Panic spreads faster than any bank closure notice. Fear drives behavior. And once Americans realized they couldn't access their money, chaos would unfold in ways most people have only imagined in movies. And here's the kicker. Even if the government intervened, even if the Federal Reserve injected emergency liquidity, the trust in the system would be shaken for years. People might hoard cash, stop using banks, or demand physical currency at every transaction. Modern America, where convenience is king, would suddenly feel like living in the 1930s. As I sat in the lobby, I started to imagine extreme scenarios. What if the banks didn't just freeze temporarily, but failed entirely? Entire cities, New York, Houston, Miami, would descend into financial gridlock. Online bill payments would fail. Credit card networks could collapse. Mortgages, student loans, car payments, all disrupted. I thought about friends in San Francisco. Their tech startup depends entirely on digital banking, cloud payments, and fast funding. All of a sudden, payroll couldn't go through. Suppliers stop shipping hardware. Investors panic. Venture capital dries up. A thriving business ecosystem collapses in hours. And then I realized something terrifying. Even the smallest Americans, seniors living on fixed incomes in Cleveland, families in suburban Dallas, would feel it first. Those who rely entirely on bank accounts for day-to-day survival would be paralyzed. Money isn't just convenience, it's life support. I tried to calm myself. I thought about possible solutions. Cash, I barely have any. Check, not useful in today's world. Prepaid cards, they need funding from a working bank account. In a modern economy, the bank is the lifeblood. Freeze the banks, and the country starts gasping for air. By mid-morning, lines had formed outside ATMs across Manhattan. Word spread like wildfire on social media. People were queuing for hours, attempting to withdraw cash, but limits were imposed. Rumors of nationwide banking freezes circulated. Anxiety built. Panic purchasing began in local grocery stores. Essentials like bottled water, bread, and milk were flying off shelves. And it struck me, this is what a modern financial crisis looks like in real time. Not in numbers or Wall Street tickers. Not in interest rates or monetary policy debates, but in the terrified faces of ordinary Americans, from Miami to Boston, from Los Angeles to Chicago, watching helplessly as the system they trusted collapsed before their eyes. At this moment, I knew something had to be done, but the scale of the problem was overwhelming. Every major bank in the country was interconnected. The ripple effect meant that even those not directly frozen would feel delays, defaults, and disruptions. It was then, in the chaos, that I realized the full truth. Our modern economy, as advanced and digital as it seems, is only as strong as the trust we place in the banking system. Remove that trust, and the illusion of security evaporates almost instantly. And that's when I made the decision to document everything. The panic, the confusion, the effects in different cities, the human stories. Because this wasn't just a bank problem, it was an American problem, a New York problem, a Los Angeles problem, a Houston problem, a problem that could any one of us at any time. Before we continue, I need you to do something. Hit the like button if this story is giving you chills, subscribe to Murder Oblivion, and turn on notifications. By mid-afternoon, the tension in the bank lobby had grown unbearable. People whispered frantically, clutching their phones like lifelines. The fluorescent lights flickered as if mirroring the anxiety in the room. I glanced around, noticing faces pale with worry. Students, retirees, parents, and small business owners, all paralyzed by the same invisible enemy, a frozen bank account. I tried calling my friends in other cities, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, but the story was the same. Banks everywhere were locked down. Even the big ones, JP Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, were affected. The digital backbone of America's financial system had been crippled. It was surreal, like the entire country had hit a pause button on life. As I sat, nervously pacing the lobby, a bank manager finally approached. Her name badge read Alina, and she carried a folder thick with notices. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed urgency. "Sir," she said quietly, "the system experienced a coordinated security protocol lockdown. It's temporary, but we don't have an exact ETA yet. We've escalated it to the Federal Reserve and IT security teams. They're working around the clock." I swallowed hard. "Temporary? But hours? Days?" "Hopefully hours," she replied, shaking her head. "We understand the panic and we're doing everything possible to restore access safely." That word "safely" was oddly chilling. It reminded me how fragile our reliance on banks had become. Every transaction, every paycheck, every grocery purchase depended on a system so vast and complex that one glitch could halt life as Americans knew it. I stepped outside the bank, hoping to catch some fresh air and maybe a sense of perspective. The streets were chaotic. Taxi drivers refused cards, restaurants limited tables because digital payments were frozen, and ATMs displayed the ominous out-of-service message. On the sidewalks, conversations buzzed. "Can't pay my rent? How am I supposed to buy gas? They're saying it might be nationwide." And then it hit me. Fear was contagious. Every story, every social media post, every worried glance added to the collective anxiety. Even if the banks restored accounts by tonight, the damage to trust could last for weeks, maybe months. As I walked toward a cafe, I noticed a group of people huddled around a laptop. They were trying to figure out alternatives. Cash exchanges, peer-to-peer transfers, even cryptocurrency wallets. One woman exclaimed, "This is insane. How can the whole city be frozen at once?" I realized then that Americans weren't just facing a frozen bank, they were facing a crisis of control. Money is power, and suddenly that power had vanished. Hours passed. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across Manhattan. Panic was beginning to morph into action. Local authorities began coordinating with banks to implement emergency protocols. Cash reserves were mobilized. Teller windows were reopened with manual verification systems. In some neighborhoods, armored trucks distributed cash to alleviate immediate needs. Inside the bank, the atmosphere shifted slightly. The IT team had finally connected with the Federal Reserve's Emergency Response Unit. They implemented a step-by-step restoration. Accounts would be unfrozen in batches, prioritizing essentials like payrolls, Social Security deposits, and mortgage payments. I watched as the first few customers received notifications that access had been restored. Relief swept the room in waves. Phones buzzed with transaction confirmations. People hugged, some even laughed with disbelief. But it was still fragile. The system wasn't fully restored yet, and everyone knew it. That evening, as I finally sat down with a cup of coffee, I reflected on the day. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also enlightening. Americans take their banking system for granted, assuming access to money is always guaranteed. Today proved that the foundation of our economy, trust in banks, was both incredibly strong and astonishingly fragile. In the days that followed, banks rolled out permanent solutions to prevent future freezes. Redundant systems were established. Manual verification procedures were refined. Emergency cash distributions were planned in advance, and the Federal Reserve issued a public statement reassuring the country. Digital accounts would never be frozen nationwide without coordination, and safeguards had been strengthened to prevent such a scenario from recurring. Even though accounts were restored, the psychological impact remained. People began carrying more cash, checking balances obsessively, and asking questions they'd never thought about before. How safe is my money? What would happen if a bank actually fails? How much do I rely on a system I don't fully understand? The experience also highlighted the role of communication during a crisis. Banks began working on instant notification systems, explaining issues in real time so fear wouldn't spread unchecked. Americans, once passive consumers of banking services, now demanded transparency and accountability. And as I looked back at my own frozen account, now fully accessible, I realized something important. While money can be frozen, the resilience of a person or a community cannot. People adapt, they find alternatives, they prepare, and most importantly, they learn lessons they'll never forget. I reached out to my friends across the country. Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, Houston, Boston. Everyone had stories of fear, improvisation, and eventual relief. Some had waited hours for cash. Others had temporarily borrowed from friends or neighbors. But by the end of the day, the shared experience connected us all. A crisis that could have divided turned into a lesson in resilience and awareness. By the next week, the banking system in New York and across the United States had stabilized. Emergency protocols became part of the national conversation. Workshops and guides were released to educate Americans on contingency plans, digital security, and personal finance preparedness. The city had been tested and survived. Looking back, that morning felt like a warning more than a disaster. Banks, as indispensable as they are, rely on complex networks, human oversight, and public trust. And when any of these falter, even for a few hours, ordinary Americans feel the impact immediately. As I walked along the Manhattan skyline one evening, reflecting on the week's events, I realized that today's chaos had strengthened me. I had faced uncertainty, fear, and inconvenience, and I had survived. But more than that, I had gained knowledge that could help me, my friends, and my family prepare for the unexpected. So to anyone watching this, keep some cash on hand, understand your banking system, and never underestimate the importance of being prepared. Because while banks are powerful, they are not invincible, and knowledge is your greatest protection. If you enjoyed this deep dive into what happens when a modern American bank freezes, hit that like button, subscribe to Murder Oblivion, and share your own stories in the comments. Have you ever faced a frozen account? How did you cope? Your experience might just help someone else stay prepared. And remember, in America, money feels safe until it isn't. Today, we learned how fragile it can be and how quickly ordinary life can be disrupted. But we also learned resilience, adaptability, and the power of being informed. And those lessons, they last a lifetime.